Hello, everybody. Okay, just putting the finishing touches here. Okay. Speaking of, as you know, when I play the whole song, it means I need a little time to prepare. Speaking of playing the whole song, I want to share with you that something cool that Jen did for us. Jen Bailey Guerra, is Jen here? I don't know if Jen's here yet. But she put together this. She said we should somebody's suggestion. Oh, she's here. Somebody's suggestion. We should start collecting the songs that we start with here. There's always, these are songs I like, and there's always a connection to what we're going to study today. So there's a little bit of a game up front. And so she put together this Spotify playlist, so we can add "Pictures of You" by The Cure, which is just a terrific song. And the line in that song today to think about is that I've been looking for so long at these pictures of you that I almost believe that they're real. And we're going to think a little bit about pictures today and the dangerous tendency to see pictures as reality. Okay, so you don't usually speak out the connection, but that's the connection today. Okay, today we're in a kind of a real turning point in the Torah's language, and I might have said that last week. Maybe I said that last week because it's true. Last week with Parshat Mishpatim, the narrative flow of the Torah abruptly halts, and we got a whole catalog of laws. And so you notice when Parshat Mishpatim comes around, wow, okay, so the Torah is going to be a legal code as well. Wow, it's going to devote an entire Parsha just to giving me one law after another. We hadn't seen that before. It's not that the Torah doesn't concern itself with details and particulars. We certainly have genealogy lists. We have, we have deviations from narrative in little ways, but until last week, we haven't really seen that the Torah might be presenting itself as something more than a storybook, as actually a code of some sort. Okay, so that's last week, and you feel the move from narrative to law. But that's not a terribly surprising. The shift is worth noticing. It's not a terribly surprising new topic, right? We who are in this tradition know that it is composed of all kinds of laws, famously legalistic tradition. So, and law itself is it may not be as exciting as story, but it matters, and we can think about it and we can analyze it. It's familiar to us as a genre. So if the Torah was gonna switch to a new mode of talking last week, and we thought that was the big switch, then when we get to this week, we have to be even more startled, because now there's yet another mode of language that we encounter, and it's not narrative, and it's not law, and it's more. It turns out to be more difficult and denser than either of them, and that is this week. What we get is instructions, specifically building instructions. It's there's something. Like I said, you could make this case around law, but it's really startling when we come to it here in Parshat Terumah and encounter something that looks like a furniture assembly manual. Right? That's basically the feeling, the language that we're going to be dealing with for this entire Parsha, and all of which is to say, boy, here's where the Torah gets really difficult. Difficult to make meaning of, certainly. Why do we need all these details? We'll get a little sample of, actually, let's just so I'm not talking in abstract, let me give you just a little sample of what we're talking about here, the kind of Torah that we're going to encounter today. And here's just a snippet. This is the stuff that we're going to be looking at today. They shall make an ark of acacia wood, and 2.5 cubits long it shall be, and 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold, overlay it inside and out, make upon it a gold molding round about. Cast 4 gold rings for it to be attached to its 4 feet, 2 rings on one side of its walls and 2 rings on the other. So you start to read stuff like this and you're just like, wait a minute. This is, I came to shul to hear this. I opened my sacred literature to see this. Not to say that it's not necessary. It might be necessary, just like a furniture assembly manual is necessary when you have furniture that needs assembling. But the kind of quality of reading is strange, and all of it circles around this new object, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, which is in itself kind of a strange new item for our consideration. The portable desert worship area temple that suddenly God announces they're wandering through the desert, right? 40 years of wandering through the desert, that they're going to have to build this thing and carry it with them through the desert and assemble it every time they stop, and then take it down every time they're ready to go. And everything's gotten very detailed and almost I think I'm trying not to say boring. Yeah, I think I'm trying not to say boring. So the question is, what do we do with this stuff? What do we do with this material? How do we make sense of it? How do we make meaning of it? And maybe we can even ask, how did Moses make sense of it? How did Moses make meaning of it? Because as we'll soon see, it's difficult reading for us. It may even have been difficult for Moshe, for Moses, who received these instructions. We have some hints that Moshe also had some trouble with this reading, and so we're gonna look today at the difficulty that Moshe had with this information. And yeah, let me just leave it there. That's enough introduction. Let's say a blessing, and we'll get into our study for today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So just calling on God to help us understand that which is so difficult in God's Torah. Okay, so here we go. We're going to get mired in details very soon in this Parsha, but at the outset, up front, we have at least one line that's just beautiful. I only have when you hear a quote from Parshat Terumah, inevitably you're going to hear a quote from its eighth verse, right? Chapter 25, verse 8. V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocha. Make me a mikdash, a sanctuary, and I will dwell amongst them. I God will come down. This is the first real sense we have of the Shekhinah, like the divine presence. It will be present in our midst. We can somehow summon the divine presence down onto earth. And that's what the Mishkan is for. So, okay, it's going to be very difficult reading, but at least the grand purpose of it, is grand. And that line certainly is notable and quotable. But I want to take us to the verse just after that line, because it's also a kind of big picture verse, a little bit of a step back from the nitty-gritty details. And I think in the 9th verse of our Parsha, we have a clue. We have a tool, a kind of a key word, okay? And this is going to be our key word for the day. And the key word is tavnit, tavnit. So let's take a look at how it appears, and then we'll do some translating of it. Here is, let me just copy and paste. Okay, here you go. This is what we're going to look at today. Okay. Let's take a look here. Okay, so I gave you some of the details, but that was just just after the verses that I actually want to look at today. So just to give you a sense of how the big picture here is quickly juxtaposed to the nitty-gritty details. But here's that famous line, that beautiful line, Vasuli mikdash, let them make me a sanctuary, Vasuli mikdash, that I may dwell among them, v'shechanti betocham. That is a famous line. It's an important line. As you can see, there are little suggestions of great theological phenomena and implications, like God will dwell among them, inside of them, in us, in the community. There's lots to think about there, and I think we have thought about this verse in this class before, but today our verse is verse 9. K'chol asher ani mareh otcha et tavnit hamishkan ve'et tavnit kol kelav v'chein tasu. Okay, we saw that word repeated. Exactly as I show you, k'chol asher ani mareh otcha, like everything that I show you, or exactly as I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle. And our word for tabernacle is mishkan, which is really a dwelling place. Okay. Tavnit hamishkan, and here's the word that we're going to be thinking about today. The pattern is the way that it's usually translated. Tavnit hamishkan, and it repeats the word and the pattern of all of its furnishings. Vet tavnit kol kelav, v'chein tasu, and so you shall make it. Okay, so and then immediately we get to all this stuff like half cubits and gold inside and gold outside, and how many rings and attached to how many feet, and then walls and all that stuff. Okay, but just before we get into all those details, we have this word, the pattern, the tavnit. So let's just think for a second about what that might mean. What is the pattern that God would have been showing us or Moses? Let me just give another word or two on the word tavnit. One is that it's related to the word for building, livnot, bana. So tavnit is like the building pattern, right? In other words, what is a building pattern? We have a word for that in English. A building pattern is a blueprint, a blueprint. And that's an important word also. The English word is in some ways especially helpful there. We haven't yet figured out exactly how to define tavnit, the pattern, the building pattern. But blueprint is actually, that word has some currency in Jewish conversation, because we often use that word to refer to a certain idea in Jewish thought, which is that the Torah is a blueprint for the world. And this comes from a very famous midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, and then it's repeated again in the Zohar, the great mystical text of Jewish tradition. And the Zohar puts it, Histakel baraita uvare alma. God looked into the Torah and created the world. Right? It's a wild idea because it somehow suggests that the Torah informed God. And it also is a wild idea because it suggests that the world is based on the Torah. The Torah is not responding to the world. The world is like somehow structured, modeled on the structure of the Torah. So there's a lot of juicy theology in there to unpack. And, you know, like I'm using the English word blueprint as a bridge because those midrashim, those rabbinic statements do not use the word tavnit, but there is a kind of, you can feel a certain parallel imagery here, that there's something that you see, it's a pattern that you see that you're being given. You will build based on what you see. Okay, so let's just do our own interpretation for a few minutes before we dive into the to the commentators. What do you think this word means, just in context? Let's look at it again. Well, what do you think is going on here? We're reading through the Torah. We're meant to understand this in some way. Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. That's the great line. And then the next line is, like exactly like everything that I show you, et tavnit hamishkan, like the pattern of the Mishkan, ve'et tavnit kol kelav, and the pattern. Like there's another pattern. There are various tavniot here that I will be showing you, the pattern of all of its furnishings. That's how you'll make it. Okay. So let's think a little bit about what the Torah might be saying there. Marianka, you want to start us off?
Yes. Hi. Well, first of all, I want to thank you. It was great to hear a rabbi say that portion can be boring.
I didn't say it though. I said I might say it, but I didn't say it. But I hear you're right.
So the pattern thing, my first thought was like, oh, maybe if you put it in some very smart computer, it will give you the pattern of God. But of course, that's a crazy idea because there is no pattern, right? That God is undefinable. But then perhaps it's a pattern either of how God wants our community to be, or it's a pattern of how we can create a relationship. I don't even want to say communication with God, something like that I see in this pattern word.
Okay, good. So that's really interesting. Marianka, here's in this word tavnit the suggestions of a real code, a real divine code. That if God is giving us some pattern, some blueprint, then it will help us build the Mishkan. But maybe this is like those other images I just offered. This is the thing that we can look into and understand the world and maybe understand God itself. And I'm going to show you a pattern. And that suggests that there's something about the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the whole thing becomes a kind of a code for us. And indeed, it's often been read that way. The mystical traditions in Judaism will take a look at a text like this in the Torah and say, oh, the reason that there are all those details, it's not that this is the more boring section. This is the most exciting section. This has all the key information in it. Count up how many rings, count up how many planks, because those rings parallel, I don't know what they parallel, some other divine entity. And we're learning things here in an encoded way. Okay. So that's beautiful interpretation that Marianka suggests for us, or says that the Torah is suggesting for us. But Marianka offers us a cautionary as well. This is something a little strange about seeing the pattern of God, knowing the genetic code of the one who is beyond knowledge. Do we really get to see the plans? Do we really get to see the blueprint? Like, do we really get to see something here? Seeing itself is a somewhat problematic verb when we're talking about having access to divine knowledge, right? Okay. All right. Noah Pollock.
Yeah, this portion by itself, as you might have said, is very dry. But right here, I think this is the first roadmap of how we can relate to different types of learners. In saying the pattern or blueprint twice, he's saying, first I'm saying this blueprint to you, and then I'm going to show you how it's done visually. So I've seen it as a teaching map to how to relate to each different type of individual who learns differently.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that. It's such a great and sharp insight here. This whole section, which I spent a lot of time almost apologizing for, it's so different. It's such a technical reading. But you know what? some people's minds work that way. And this is a different kind of Torah, but that's good because this is an architect's Torah. This is a builder's Torah. This is and what Noah says is that this mode of communication is a new kind of a new cognitive relationship to the Torah. That is, there's something visual. There's going to be an actual diagram here, and that's good. This is a word tradition, and great. So there's lots of words, but in this moment, God is saying some things you will need to see, and Noah suggests that is like speaking to the visual learner. And maybe Moshe was a visual learner. And actually, that's exactly where our rabbis are going to go with this, to think about what did Moshe need to see, and what do the rest of us need to see or have a picture. Do you wish there were pictures, an illustrated Torah? Right? Do you feel like you read things sometime and you're like, what the heck is the Torah talking about here? Well, here's a little bit of a suggestion that even in the days of Moses, there were different modes by which God might communicate information. And some of it could be visual, and some of it, as we get into the building, could be kinesthetic. Right? That could be other modes of wisdom to be acquired, other modes of wisdom that will be absorbed more easily by different brains. Okay, so that's all very nicely suggested. Let's take just a couple more here, and then we'll push forward a little bit. Yeah, El?
In a fatal accident, but they're all matanot.
This is like a roadmap for us. Yeah, okay, good. I like that, the language that you're giving to the significance of having a pattern, and just what the way that we relate to patterns and maps and charts. That there's something about even the use of this word, that there are patterns to be detected. As a student of the Torah, I think of pattern spotting as one of my favorite and one of the most important techniques in understanding the Torah. Where are the patterns? It's not just what the Torah says, but sometimes it's repeating images or repeating phrases or the structure of the Torah. I can decode the Torah by understanding its shape, almost, its patterns. And so too, there's a little bit of a suggestion here that the world has patterns, that wisdom has patterns, that the tabernacle becomes a system for the patterns in the universe. And we are maybe being encouraged to think about what is it like to decode the Torah, the tabernacle, and the universe, to find the laws, right? Like a scientist does, finding the underlying patterns, laws, codes of the universe. So that's the kind of thinking also that we're being asked to do here. And maybe the suggestion is, because the universe also has a tavnit, a pattern. If you had the right map, you could navigate through existence itself. Okay, and take one more comment, and then I want to push a little forward. Ariella?
Well, I'm kind of interpreting this as a personal mishkan, that God's giving us instructions to give us our own personal sanctuary, and that's how we can nourish ourselves and deal with the world.
Yeah, the tabernacle, the whole structure of the tabernacle has often been, especially in the Hasidic tradition, it's been suggested that the real tabernacle is in our hearts, and God would dwell there. I don't want to go too deep down that path today, but let's hold it in mind, because if we pair that mode of interpretation, that God will dwell inside of us if we build it inside of us. So then we might be also asking, so then what's the tavnit? What's the pattern of our soul? What's the pattern of our heart? What is the pattern, the map that we might use to negotiate our internal spiritual experience? Okay, so noted. Okay, I want to now take a look at what our tradition, what our commentators do with this pattern language, because they do something very, very specific, very concrete, and it picks up on some of the suggestions that Noah was giving us, that this is a different mode of instruction, and it was necessary for a different kind of learning. Okay, so let's take a look here at the next instance of the word pattern. So this is the first time we've seen this word in the Torah, tavnit, and it's repeated twice there up at the beginning, and then we'll see it again, same chapter, Exodus 25. We get all of this. This goes on for quite a while, all of these cubits and rings, and then towards the end of that same chapter, the sort of closing thought is, note well and follow the patterns. Note well and follow the patterns for them that are being shown you on the mountain. Okay. This for them is a little funny. Let's just take that out. Note well and follow the patterns that are being shown to you on the mountain. Now that's okay. So there's that word again. The tavnit is right here. Now we have the third usage in the Torah. So it sort of bookends our discussion. There are the patterns and more patterns. Note and follow the patterns that are being shown to you on the mountain. Okay, first of all, that language, now we have like a real emphasis that these patterns are being shown to you on the mountain. And actually, the language of note well and follow is literally see and make. See and make. Ure'eh va'aseh b'tavnitam asher atam mar'eh bahar. So see and make the patterns that are being shown to you on the mountains. Okay, so what's the question here? What's the Parshanut question here? What are you seeing? How does this work? What exactly do you see? You're seeing something? Okay, there's something visual going on here. And this is what Rashi says about it. Now, Rashi picks up on the see and make language. Rashi, our most famous medieval commentator. Okay. See here, he says, in the mountain, the pattern which I show you. In other words, see here projected upon the mountain, or when you're on top of the mountain, or hovering above the mountain. But when Moses had his Sinai experience, God showed him a pattern. And this, Rashi says, tells you that Moses had great difficulty with the workmanship of the menorah until the Holy Blessed One showed him a menorah of fire. Okay, so the question is, what do you have to see? Right? Why does he have to see something? This has been a verbal tradition. God's just telling Moses how to build this thing. And you know what? It's dense, it's technical, it's complicated, but it's not that complicated. We've all put together IKEA furniture, haven't we? Put it together, it's not a big deal. What was the big deal? But our rabbis say, well, if the Torah is really belaboring the pattern point, it must be there was something that required a pattern. And what's the most complex thing in the tabernacle? The menorah, the candelabra, the lamp, which had, all of those, not 8 arms like our Chanukiah, but 6 with one in the middle, right? So that's what Moses. Now, but this is such a funny idea. Moses had a lot of trouble when God was saying, build a menorah. So God blazed a menorah of fire upon the mountain, right? Like, suddenly, it was a beautiful, a glorious image. But it's a strange one, isn't it? Like there at Mount Sinai, God's talking and talking and talking. Moses is writing down or absorbing the information. And God gets to the menorah, says, now you're going to make a menorah. And Moshe says, wait, what? Is it, how many arms is it? There's one in the middle? Wait, what do you, and indeed, when we get to the description of the menorah in this week's Parsha, it's like there are all these different tiny little parts, and some of them are referred to as the flowers of the menorah, and some of them referred to as the arms of the menorah. This is like a lot going on there. So Moshe needed a picture. He needed a picture. So that's right. Noah's right. Moshe needed to see this in order to understand it. Now, that in itself is worthy of our reflection and consideration? What does it mean that there were certain things that Moshe couldn't understand orally or hourly, like by hearing? Okay, so I'm about to ask you, what does that mean? What do you think of the idea that Moshe needed to see certain things? But to make that point fuller and stronger, I want to take you to the place in the Talmud that Rashi is drawing from, because there you'll see some of the Parshanut work. That is, you'll see how the Talmud is playing with a certain specific language in the Torah that they see a kind of clue that these are the things that had to be shown. And it isn't the word tavnit. In fact, it's the word zeh, or this, or that right there, that right there. Okay, so let's just take a look at what it turns out there are. This is where Rashi's drawing from, the Talmud in Menachot. And here it is, the Talmud in Menachot. The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught 3 matters were difficult for Moshe to understand. Okay, not just the menorah, but 3 things. So this is just like a fascinating idea. There were, in all the things in the Torah, there were 3 things that Moshe needed a picture of because he just couldn't understand what the heck God was talking about. So 3 things were difficult for Moshe to understand until the Holy Blessed One showed them to him with the divine finger. In other words, God had to actually point and say, look, it's like this. And these are the 3. The menorah, that's where Rashi got this idea, the menorah. And the new moon, and the impure creeping animals. That's a long translation for shratzim, like vermin, bugs, which are not pure. Okay, so the idea here is the menorah in its intricate construction, the new moon, which probably refers to not just the appearance of the new moon and the new month and the new calendar, but all the intricacies of the calendar and how we chart time. That was difficult for Moshe to understand, how to coordinate time according to the moon and the stars. You have to actually look at the moon to know. This is a famous moment, the new moon, and we'll see it in just a second. And then finally, the impure creeping animals. God gives a list of some animals that are impure, like birds. But when it comes to creepy crawling things, we just get the information that they are forbidden to us. But what exactly animals are you talking about? What creepy crawlies? That's not very clear. What animal do you mean? And so again, Moshe had to have a picture of them, right, an illustration. And the reason, this is just the actual Parshanut work, meaning the work of interpreting the language of the Torah, is that these 3 items are all indicated with the language of this right here. And the language of this right here is zeh. Okay, so this is the work of the menorah. Zeh maseh ha-menorah. And that actually takes place later in the Torah when, again, we talk about the menorah, and there the language is, this is the work of the menorah. So that's a clue that God had to point to it and say, just like this. And the new moon, as it is written, this is the moment that we were leaving Egypt, and suddenly the narrative stops and we get our first commandment, Achodesh hazeh lachem rosh chadashim. This month, the month, this, HaChodesh hazeh, this month right here, look up right in the sky. This is the month, this is the moon. This is what I'm talking about. And the shratzim, the little creepy crawly things, as it is written, and these are they which are unclean for you among the swarming things. And these is once again, v'zeh, this right here. Look right here. And there are those who say that God also showed Moses the halachot, the laws of slaughtering, because there's another zeh. Now, this is that which you shall sacrifice upon the altar. Now, you probably can feel that there's a little bit of a stretch here, because the word this is not such an uncommon word. Zeh? I mean, you're making this big deal over zeh. But what the rabbis have done is that they found a number of cases, a very complex, either structural or in some way complex items to identify. And they've noticed that in a lot of those places, there's a look right here, this right here language. And that teaches you that these are the items that Moshe actually had to see. So let's just think about that for a minute, that there were certain things that Moshe couldn't just hear, and maybe certain things that we can't just hear, Moshe needed a picture of. And one was the menorah, and one was the new moon. And there I want to like parentheses, calendar, time, cosmology, the moving of the spheres, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? There's something in there that Moshe needs to see, that we all needed to see. What exactly is not kosher? Which animals can I eat and not eat? What's pure and impure? And then finally someone says, yeah, what about laws of slaughter? That's really difficult too. And it is famously difficult to know exactly how to slaughter an animal, kosher slaughter. So that also required a look at the picture here, okay? So what do you make of this? What do you make of this idea that there were certain things that Moshe needed visual aid in understanding, that maybe we need visual aid? Why is that important? Why does that matter to us, that there be certain kinds of visual patterns that the rabbis are suggesting that parts of this Torah need to be seen to be understood? Okay. All right. I see some hands. Let's turn to Alexandra.
Thank you. To me, it all ties into perhaps one purpose of the Mishkan pattern being so intricate, so beautiful, so amazing, is to teach the people their worth, their own intrinsic worth, their divine worth, because to shift them out of the slave mentality. And perhaps these are the things that Moshe needed extra help to shift out of his own residual slave mentality, this idea of you are you determine your own light. And with the menorah, you are the master of your own time with the moon, and you determine how you feed yourself, how you make yourself pure and impure with the foods that you eat. And these are all concepts that a slave people need to really learn and be taught, and are very foreign. So to have these very specific patterns, to be taught our own intrinsic worth as separate from the slave mentality, and those are concepts that Moshe may have needed extra help with.
Okay, that's interesting. The sort of the symbolism that you're attributing to these things, that they are kind of they are kind of primary representations of freedom and autonomy. That's an interesting reading, and I want to just like especially highlight the suggestion that you're offering that there's a new education going on here, because I think that seems relevant. Like maybe, this is all new. This idea of this is going to be a new system, a new religion, and for a people who have had no society, no autonomy, but no mechanism for mapping out their world. They just did as they were told, and now it's like they're kind of children in the life of free people, and so they're trying to like figure out. They need actual instruction because, like kids do, they need pictures. Okay, so it's just like I'm tagging on to what Alexandra said there. Let's hear from Emily.
It just strikes me what you just said, that to the extent that they do know how to build, it's something very Egyptian and something that would have been dedicated to those gods. And I read a lot of these details as something that we might have difficulty understanding today because we weren't there, but that the numbers and the clarity made sense to someone who was there. I always told my kids, they're adults now, but that if someone were to say to you, and never bring green things into your home in the month of December, you wouldn't need them to say Christmas tree, right? You understand that. So this is one of the ways that I approach this, that what they might have understood about building would have been very much dependent on where they had been enslaved and what those gods were.
Yeah, that's a really interesting context to put this in, right? That they spent a lot of time building. Actually, of all things, that is something that the Israelites did and knew how to do. And may I add, since you put it that way, Emily, it's such an interesting frame, that Moshe didn't do that building, right? So like Moshe didn't actually have that same kind of like training that he would just know how you build something, right? So that's really interesting too. And in fact, the Torah very specifically designates a builder. Moshe is going to communicate the blueprint, but it's Bezalel who will take on the project of building. That may be that Moshe, Mr. words and ideas and prophecy, was not such a hands-on kind of learner, right? So that as well. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. Susan Kamen.
It just strikes me that everything in their lives as they're wandering is so temporary and nothing there, that this is about giving them something. Something
that is actually substantial, something tangible. Okay, good. Okay.
Not just the tent, not just the everything changing all the time. This is something, because God they need to have that strength, and the menorah too, that this gives them a thing.
Okay, excellent. Okay, this is an important turning point, I think, in our conversation. Susan offers us, because Susan points out something that is deeply significant and so obvious that in a way it both does and doesn't need to be said. This is an object. What we're talking about is a physical. A lot of the laws that we read about in Parshat Mishpatim, they were great. A lot of the laws in the Ten Commandments are great, but they're concepts, they're practices, they're ways of being. This is a thing, a tangible, physical thing. And Susan suggests, and they don't have a lot of things. They're in a flat desert plain. So suddenly they have an object. And so it makes sense that we are, that we're talking in the language of building and of instruction, but also in the language of visual language, in picture language, pictorial language, because this is something tangible. This is something physical. And that's a new, what Susan asks, what is the significance for a people who have nothing to suddenly have a great grand object that is going to be at the center of their camp? Okay. Okay. I want us to keep that in mind, that object, that physical object in mind, because I will just sort of suggest to you that physical objects in this tradition are always fraught, right? Physical, tangible representations in this tradition are suspect. Okay, and here I want to perform a little trick of my own. I want to make one connection here that you'll recognize as very me. Like this is the kind of thing that I especially like to do. This is like my style, so to speak. Which is to say that we have been playing with the language of tavnit, of a pattern, that's what we've been calling it. And here it appears in our Parsha, in those 3 times that we've seen. There is, you've heard me say this before, I always get excited when I say this, there is only one other place in the Torah where the word tavnit is used. Where is it? Where is it? When the Torah does this, when there are 2 places in this entire book where the one key word is used, then we know we are meant to read these 2 places in conversation with one another, okay? So let's take a look at the other place in the Torah where we see the language of tavnit, I'm not sure exactly how to, we've been calling it pattern. Let's see how we might translate it here. Okay, and let's keep Susan's comments in mind, that there's something very tangible and physical about the Mishkan. And remember that the idea is that most of the time, Moses just needed words, just words. But now Moses needs a picture, okay? So let's take a look at the other place where we see this language come up. And it's in Deuteronomy, and it's a description of Mount Sinai. So let's take a look, and I want you to pay attention to visual or pictorial language, okay? Rak hishamer lecha, take utmost care, ushmor nafshecha me'od, and watch yourselves very scrupulously, so that you do not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes. Now there's some visual language. You saw these things with your own eyes. And remember these things so that they don't fade from your mind as long as you live. And make them known to your children and to your children's children. What did you see? Yom asher amadat lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'chorev. The day that you stood before your God, Hashem at Chorev, that's another word for Sinai. When Hashem said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words. Okay, you saw something, but the instruction was you were going to hear something, okay, in order that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth and so teach their children. You came forward and stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was here's visual language. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the very skies, dark with the densest clouds. Was that the flames of the picture of the menorah? Right? Okay, the mountain's on fire. And now listen to this line here. Hashem spoke to you, God spoke to you out of the fire, and you heard the sound of words, but perceived no picture. Here it is. Kol dvarim atem shomim utmuna enchem roim. Saw no picture, really. You heard the sound of words, but saw no picture. Nothing but a voice. And that feels like that. That's Jewish theology, right? No visual God, only an experience of God. No pictures, only words. Okay, that's the dichotomy we've been playing with this whole hour. Do we just listen to the message of God, or do we need to see something? So God declared to you the covenant that you were commanded to observe, the 10 commandments, inscribing them on 2 tablets of stone. There's another physical, tangible object. At the same time, Hashem commanded me to impart to you laws and rules for you to observe in the land that you're about to cross into and occupy. And we're about to see Tavnit come up. For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape. You saw no shape when God spoke to you at Chorev out of the fire. Not to act wickedly, make sure not to act wickedly, and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness whatsoever, the tavnit of a man or a woman, the tavnit of any beast on earth, the tavnit of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the tavnit of anything that creeps on the ground. That's interesting. We were talking about creepy crawly things. The form, there's one more. The tavnit. The form is the way they translate it here. So we're going to try and figure out what does this mean here, but form is the way they translate. The tavnit of any fish that is on the waters below the earth. And when you look up to the sky and behold the sun and the moon and the stars, the whole heavenly host, you must not be lured into bowing down to them or serving them. These your God allotted to other peoples everywhere under heaven, but Hashem took you and brought you out of Egypt, that iron blast furnace, to be God's very own people, as is now the case. Okay, that was a long reading, but you see why I was reading. There's so much in there that's so visual, and yet the constant warning is don't get caught up in the visual. Don't think about the picture. Don't think about the picture, right? And be careful. Be careful. And be careful, especially, it seems, because of what you experienced at Sinai, that you don't make a tavnit of human form, animal form, fish form, bird form, insect form. That's the other usage of tavnit in this tradition, in this Torah. So what does it mean here? And what connection is there between the tavnit that the tabernacle was explicitly constructed around, that the rabbis say Moses had to see it, And then this later instruction that you got to remember, you don't see anything, and you certainly shouldn't make a tavnit, a representation, a picture of anything. Okay, it's time for a couple last comments. So let's see. I saw Emily just put her hand up, so let's see what Emily has to say.
It seems that the things that you should not make an image of are all the things God created, the people, the animals, the everything. But that what you can do is make this thing that I'm telling you to make, which is clearly a man-made thing because I'm telling you to make it. And another aspect of it is, in telling you to make this, there's an entire chapter on how to do it. And so if you were to be allowed to make images of other things, there would need to be entire chapters on how to make an image of a fish, how to make an image of a tree. And so it's like a lesson. You cannot capture these other things in images. And this is the only thing for which you have a pattern. And its purpose is to, well, what its purpose is, a place for me to dwell.
Good. So such that you said so much there. That's so beautifully put. There are things that we will have a physical, visual, tangible relationship to. There are objects in this tradition. There are. And in this case, in the case of the tabernacle, it's very clear. This is an object. It has a picture. It has a representation. You're being told how to make it. You can relate to it that way. Make sure that you don't think of a human being or a natural thing that way. These things you cannot create. You have no access to the blueprint of the human being. We may try, and we're now doing better and better job with like DNA coding, but on some level, there are certain patterns that are beyond our capacity. And there are religious implications there. Some things it's okay to build, not a big deal. You can build a building, but be careful not to build a sculpture that might be turned into an idol, because that pattern very quickly becomes it becomes an idol. There's certain things that we have to be careful not to put into physical, tangible representation, and other things that clearly we have a physical object for. So there's we're kind of doing two things at once in this tradition, and we're being very careful about it. Okay. All right. I think we have time for one more comment, and Marlene, I'll turn to Marlene, who's had her hand up for a while.
I'm thinking about my work as a teacher and pattern recognition in math education, which is so important when kids are young. And I'm wondering if this is less about recognizing the pattern of the Mishkan or the pattern of not drawing an image of somebody, and more about recognizing the pattern of what it means to be a Jew. And sometimes that means recognizing where we worship. That means recognizing how we eat. That means recognizing how we pray. That means recognizing how we treat each other. And that it's really the word pattern is a really strong pattern for starting to build that understanding of the whole thing. And so the idea that Moses needed a visual, I'm less impressed about him being a visual learner than I am that we use all the tools we have at our disposal to make sure that as we cross the desert into Israel, we have the beginning of understanding of these patterns.
Great. This comment layers so nicely on top of Emily's comment just now, and is a good way to close our conversation, which is that we are recognizing a kind of dichotomy in our whole tradition that we're going to have to continue to grapple with, where on the one hand, we are above all, it is the second commandment. Here, I actually have the second commandment on our page. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness, any picture is the word that I would use. No picture of what is in the heavens above or on the earth below, right? Just like you saw no picture, okay? That's a supreme commandment. Remember, God, the mysterious, the spiritual cannot be concretized, cannot be put into form. That is so central to this whole theology, this whole practice, this whole civilization, this whole worldview. And yet, this is actually an extremely physical religion where there are all kinds of objects. There's all kinds of ritual, and we shake things, and we make blessings on objects, and we build tabernacles, and we build Sukkot, and we build things, and we have a concrete, tangible, physical relationship to things. And even at Mount Sinai, there was a mountain, there was fire, there were tablets, there were stones that Moshe brought down from the mountain. There's all kinds of physical representations that are not just in the tradition, but central tradition, that have to be understood and that are legitimized, as Emily said. It's okay to make certain things. It's okay to have a physical, tangible. This isn't a religion of just pure abstract contemplation. And yet, we always have to hold the tension between, let's not get too physical. We can build a tabernacle, but we can't build a God. Okay? How do you hold that tension? That we'll actually build things and they will be holy things, but we have to make sure that we know that we can't build a God, and we can't build a person. We can't. There are things that cannot. There are things that are in God's domain, and we shouldn't attempt to build them. And then there are things that are beyond building, beyond physical representation. Okay, and that's the tension that we have to hold, and that's what these two appearances of the word tavnit, form, pattern, building, map, are there doing in these two places in our tradition. Okay, we'll close here, but I will just close by saying a happy birthday to Bob Numeroff, who's with us today. And this was Bob's bar mitzvah Parsha. So it's a Bob Parsha. So happy birthday, Bob, and wishing you all a good Shabbos. I'll see you next week.
Good Shabbos. Thank
I
you.
love learning with you all. Bye.
Shabbos.
Thank you.
Shabbos.
Bye, everyone.